to the art of software estimation. We're going to go ahead and get started here and kick off our time together. We're excited for everyone to join us for the last webinar, Ascendle webinar of 2022. My name is Luke McConnell. I will be one of the people talking today. I have been a product owner for the past 5 years or so, working with the business side of software development, understanding what the needs are and of the business and helping convey that to different teams. I've worked with a lot of different team structures and teams themselves on products and projects across different technologies. Very excited to share what we've learned from different successes and mistakes along the way today. So thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Luke. And hi to everyone else. My name is Ben Friedeberg. I'm a senior software architect at Ascendle. I've been in the software industry for about 20 years now. And I have seen estimation go well, and I've seen estimation go poorly. And I've had a lot of postmortems where we have made software estimates and discussed, well, what happened? And so, yeah, I'm excited for us to get a chance to chat with you all today. A little bit about Ascendle. We are a development shop. We like to work with our customers directly, building web apps, mobile applications, custom platforms, and doing agile coaching, product strategy sorts of work. One of our favorite things to do is actually to partner with your development team and work together with you, both showing you our process, but also training and skilling up so that you're ready to get up and running with developing software better.
So today, our agenda is to walk through our steps typically for a software estimation. Now, we're going to focus on the estimation at the beginning portions of a new project, what it looks like when you're coming from, hey, we have this idea, what is it going to take? Step 1 is to build a product backlog. Step 2 is to estimate the backlog. Step 3 is estimate what your team velocity can be. And step 4 is creating a forecast to do that. Seems like it's pretty easy 4 steps, but we all know estimation is not that easy. It can be that art that we're going to talk about today.
And that's a great point, Luke. The idea of estimation as an art, as opposed to a science, comes into the fact that this is a human activity. I know right now, like in modern culture, we're starting to see, AI and automation come up, and we're scared about what computers can do well versus what humans can do well. And what we're going to talk about today is something that humans do particularly well, is understanding how big something is relative to something else, and how we leverage that ability as humans in estimation.
So estimation, we often think of it as putting numbers on a task of some sort. And what we want to say is we think estimation is actually answering questions. And the first question people typically think is like, how long is this going to take? And that's true, we typically go that, but we think there's other questions that are asked that we're working to answer through this process of estimation. And the first one is, as a product owner, sometimes you hear, can I have this feature done this quarter? I have this idea, we have something that we need to get out. I want to know if it makes sense to do it now, or should I try to do something else instead? So can I fit this into a time box? The second question we get from customers is, hey, this thing's really cool and I want it. When am I going to have it? So customers are, when will I get the new features? When is this thing that I've been asking for? We all have different maybe lists that we put out and said, here's a suggestion that I want to have done. And then we hope that maybe someday we can see some process along that. The last one we hear from stakeholders often on a project is, hey, I have a new idea. What is it going to take to do this instead? Or I want this done instead of this, or can you add this to it? Well, what does that affect everything else? Because it's not just, yeah, we'll do it. It's more what's going to give and take in order to make this happen on the timeline that we're hoping. So today, as we go through this process of estimation, we're going to talk about how can we answer these questions.
So one of the reasons that Luke and I are both here is because there's sort of this tension between the development side of a project and the business strategy side. So as agile developers, we want to be flexible. We want to respond to change. We want to release right when we're ready with that next feature, but that may not necessarily fit with what the business needs.
Yeah, because although it's great to have the agility in the development process, the business needs to plan out, when do we need to market these things? How can we sell these things? What are our customers going to want out of it? So we need predictability. We need the ability to plan ahead in some of those other areas of the business. and releasing on a schedule helps be consistency around what's going to be moving forward in that. So this tension between development and strategy is what we're going to be talking about, and why answering those questions is helpful. So this process of what it looks like for the estimation process, we start with defining what is the work going to be. Then we do the process of estimating that work, taking the time to understand and give a first guess at what that looks like. We then track that over time to see where is our process moving, and then we predict where are we moving forward. So we use some tools in order to do this, and those are things like user stories and story points and velocity and forecast. And we'll get into the actual details around what this is, because estimation is a daunting thing. And there are different steps to help the art be a little more sciencey as we're still thinking through the intricacies of estimation.
Awesome. So what we're going to be targeting is what our end result is and our end product is. And it's going to be something along these lines. So this is the version report from Jira, but you've kind of seen something along these lines before. It's roughly based on my current backlog, when can I estimate this amount of work to be done? And what's kind of the plus and minus on that? And something to know, and this is something we're going to be talking about repetitively, the estimate at the beginning of your project is the worst possible estimate you're going to get. We're going to be refining that over time. And so this is both a picture of what we can plan on, but it's also emphasizes it's a point in time. This is for today, based off of what we know now, where can we estimate that we're going to get? So we're going to talk about what sort of techniques we use to get here from there.
So the first step, like we said, was building a product backlog. What is the work going to be that you're trying to estimate at a high level? What's the big picture? We do this through writing good user stories. Now, a user story starts with being a compact requirement. It's something that's small, it's quickly understandable, and it's brief. This is to help us avoid having to write 400 to 400-page documents to say exactly what everything is going to be up front when we're really not sure what the end product is going to be in all the detail. It comes in a way to be quick and easy to write. Hopefully we can move through them quickly and understand briefly what we need to have mutual understanding among the team, and then start moving forward. They should be able to cast a shared vision where everyone can quickly understand what this is trying to do, how these different user stories fit into the whole, what the project is going to be, baking back to what value does this bring to the business overall. And lastly, they need to be prioritized by that business value. It's not a progression of how exactly we need to do step 1 to step 2 to step 2, 3. It's more, where's the most value that we can produce for the business over time, each and every sprint, making sure we're focusing on that over time in the backlog.
Yeah. And something we're going to talk about within user stories is this idea of the sentence. So as an architect, I leverage the sentence to understand what the requirements are of a user story. As a product owner, Luke uses that to communicate it to me. So for me, when I'm looking at the sentence, I understand the who. Who is the customer who's using this piece of functionality? And then I look at what is the thing I'm actually developing? And then really, really importantly, I'm looking at the why. So as a shopper, the who, I want a gift registry. So like for a shopping cart application, right? So like on Amazon wish list, because everyone's, I've got kids, so I'm managing my Amazon wish list carefully now. And why do we want this? So I can share what I want with friends and family. And a lot of times, some of this information can bubble out of these various parts, which are important for both the development team to understand in terms of what they need to plan for, but also for the business owners to understand like why these pieces of functionality are important or how they can prioritize. So, go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, we're gonna go ahead and try to do this. We like things to be interactive, and we think we learn best from doing something. So, Ben, you want to give us our prompt for what we're gonna do for building a backlog?
Okay, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna have everyone who is in the webinar join the chat. So make sure that you set your chat to everyone so that you're broadcasting to the group. And so what we're going to do is we're going to start building out the backlog for a pizza ordering application. So imagine you're going on to pizzahut.com or domino's.com or whatever, and we're going to build out the features for that backlog. So can people go ahead and put in the chat just some ideas of what you might want to include as part of a pizza ordering app? And what we're going to do is we're going to pull these in, refine our backlog, do quick estimation in real time over the course of this webinar.
So what would you expect? Yeah, there you go. Choose toppings.
Yep. Oh, and we've got current specials, pizza size. Oh, I love that because those are things we have to look at. Ooh, delivery time. And that might also include things like the current status, prices. Love it. Order confirmation. I see a couple of trackers coming in. Ooh, delivery versus pickup and understanding that stuff. Crust flavors.
Crust flavors. That's nice.
You know what? So one, I realize I probably can't mention specific businesses here, although I did previously, but I know that a pizza place that I really enjoy introduced crust flavors and they included sriracha crust, which I was excited about. Extra cheese. Rewards. This is perfect.
Rewards program. Nice.
Man, so my webinar attendees are 100% hired as stakeholders because we got immediate feedback, which I'm absolutely loving. Ooh, allergy filters, that's an awesome one because, you know, as a pizza user, I want to make sure that my pizza hasn't touched peanuts.
All right, I'm working on adding some things here.
Okay. So, Luke, do you mind if I show them a little bit of what you're working on while we go? Okay, cool. So what we're going to be doing is building out our backlog using an Excel spreadsheet. Well, this is a Google Sheets spreadsheet. And so over here, we're generating these user stories. And then later on, we're going to be taking these user stories, turning them into story points, and figuring out how things going on. So I think we're pretty good to start moving. Do you think we have a reasonable backlog?
Yeah, I think so. I don't know. It's a little bit small on screen, Ben. Is there a way for you to maybe bump up your percentage a little bit?
Ooh, I sure can. Let's zoom up to 150.
All right. So as we were looking through
100%.
some of these things, obviously you guys had so many suggestions. I couldn't get them all in here that quickly. But the first one was, as a customer, I want to review my orders so I can see what I've purchased in the past. Or as a customer, I want to customize my own pizza toppings so I can be selective in the toppings that I have. As a customer, I want a pizza shipped to my house so I don't have to drive to the restaurant. As a customer, I want to track the progress of my pizza delivery so I know when my pizza will arrive. Then you have some admin things. So as an administrator, I want to modify the list of products so I can adjust our offerings over time. I want to manage my restaurant menu so I can keep menu updated. I want to run reports on pizza orders so I can customize purchasing trends. And then we said the rewards program there. So, I have one more. Then the last one, I want to filter out allergens of toppings so I can be assured pizza is safe for my family. So you'll see this sentence structure. We don't want just to say, filter out allergens. We want to say, who is the person, what do they want, and why do they want that? Because we can get more context. The development team have a better understanding of why are we doing this. And when we just become order takers on development teams, we begin to have less ownership over why we're doing it and having empowerment as a team to do that.
Yep. Awesome backlog generation. Thank you, Luke McConnell, product owner extraordinaire. Well, let us move on, and we are going to talk about estimating our backlog. So the idea here is we're still not going to be talking about time. We are going to be talking about effort. What is the relative effort we're looking at in terms of what this backlog is actually going to be? So remember when I talked about an art versus a science? So I think all of the humans on this call can probably look at this, once again, unfortunately branded piece of clip art. But this Coke is about 32 ounces, give or take, someone might say. But what if I told you that this Coke cup was actually my height? If this is actually a 6 foot tall cup of Coke, well, suddenly this size is very difficult to guess because you don't really know, well, based on widths and how many ounces, I'm not exactly sure. But the idea here is that if I showed you these 4 cups and I said, okay, let's look at this cup here over here. So this is going to be our medium, right? And this cup, is this larger or smaller than the medium? Well, it's obviously smaller. How about this cup? Is this larger or smaller? Well, it's probably a little bit larger than the medium. And likewise with this extra large. And so it's very easy to see that these sizes are relative to each other, larger or smaller. So we're going to utilize that for estimation in a moment.
So because it's hard to quantify small, medium, and large, extra large, we use what we call story points. So it's a cone scale, or a modified Fibonacci scale, that allows us to be able to choose a relative size to something. Again, we want to emphasize this is not an hour. This should take 13 hours, or this should take 13 days. There's no necessarily measuring point with this. It's about relative scale again. So it's 13, 20, something bigger, it's smaller. You'll notice that each of them is about 50% give or take from the one next to it. Allows us to be able to have that flexibility, knowing that our estimation is not going to be perfect, and we're trying to relatively size how big something is compared to the others. We'd also recommend that in the very first stages of estimation in a project, you should really be between 8 and 40. The 1, 2, and 3, and 5, that's what you're going to need when you're in the sprints working on the work. We don't want large things there, so we can keep process or progress moving for what the project is going to be. But if something's bigger than a 40, it's probably so unknown, it's really not going to be accurate to be able to estimate that. How do we know if it's a 40, 100, a 200, which can drastically change your estimate? So trying to get those stories that we talked about in a range in this initial estimation, somewhere between an 8 and a 40, is important to make sure we have some parameters around how we're going about it.
Yep. So let's go back to our cups. So let's say that we're going to look at the backlog that we've talked about already. And instead of saying, oh, this is a small or this is a large, we're going to say, okay, we're going to use these story points, and we're going to pick some stories that are relatively sized to each other, and then understand how to size the rest of them. And so the way we actually, oh, sorry, go ahead. Yeah, we'll talk about how we get there in a second.
So some things that we want to make sure we're doing while we're estimating, there are goals that we have as we're working together, is first, you want to leverage the team's experience. We've brought a group of people together to do this project for a reason, because all of them have different experiences and knowledge that can bring into this, and everyone's ideas and thoughts are important. The second is we want to encourage discussion. All too often I've seen estimation sessions where when we're not discussing well, that we are off in the end. When we didn't ask the right questions, we didn't have a good back and forth around what this is meaning, where the business in the side thought we said something and communicating, but then obviously didn't land right with the development team. That's when you have problems with estimating. So encourage a discussion that you go. Third, involve everyone there. Sometimes people who have been around longer tend to dominate the conversation, or who maybe feel more experienced, and we leave out some people that are maybe newer to the team. But having everyone's perspective there not only allows us to have a better estimate, but it also allows us to have more ownership amongst the whole team that's there. And lastly, make it democratic. Allow it for a voting process in a way that everyone can feel comfortable adding a estimate or a thought there. So that way, when we're getting to the point of choosing, it can feel like we're at a
Sorry, it looks like we lost Luke. We're going to let him come back for a moment, and we're going to move on. But the idea is, in terms of estimating, the goal of making this democratic is the idea of bringing in everyone and allowing all of them to have a unique voice in the estimation process. So one way we actually perform this is by playing a game, because I'm a game player, I enjoy it, and we're using something called planning poker. And so the idea here is that as a group, we're going to go through each story, we'll discuss those stories and understand like what an individual story might take in our minds, and then we'll all vote on that story based on the number of available points. So in our case, so we said we're going to be using that 8, 13, 20, 40. And then if people vote and the numbers come in and there's a much disparity there, we'll discuss We'll figure out why some people thought the numbers were higher, why some people thought the numbers were lower, and then potentially re-vote if we haven't come to a consensus. The idea being we want to narrow down as a group and leverage our entire perspective and understand precisely what our group thinks an estimate might be for a particular story.
So we're gonna estimate our backlog. I just decided to do a Houdini act there for a second. All right, we're back though. So we're gonna go ahead and try to give an idea of what this backlog we just created could be in terms of estimation. So what we need to start off is some anchor stories. What are the things that we can kind of just agree on? And because of the sake of time, Ben and I are just gonna go ahead and start. I was looking at this list, Ben. I think that this first one of I want to review my orders that I've purchased in the past could be an 8. It's not really large. It's more of a listing page that's out there from previous history. I think an 8 would be a good story point for that.
Okay, that works for me.
Can you find something you think would be like double that or maybe a little bigger?
Yeah, so I feel like this, as an administrator, I want to modify my list of products. This seems like a really good way of, it's sort of larger, it involves administration, and we're adjusting offerings over time. So we've got some variability here and some updates here. So let's call this R20. Does that work for you?
Yeah, it works great. So now that we have our 8 and a 20, let's go ahead and choose that next one down. I want to customize my own pizza so I can be selective in my pizza toppings. So what we're going to ask, we're actually going to put up a Zoom poll here for everyone that has that modified Fibonacci scale. Go ahead and select what you think it is between an 8 and a 40. Now, remember, this is about relative size. Is this a little bit bigger than an 8? Is it a lot bigger than an 8? Is it a little bit bigger, smaller than a 20? Is it a lot bigger than a 20? So go ahead and cast your vote, and we'll see what they come up with.
Let's see, so we've got about 15, 16. I'm going to hide the responses for a hot minute until they seem to settle down. That's the poker part. So we've got about 20 responses. We're about halfway there. Okay, it looks like we're settling at about 25 responses. That's pretty good.
Yep, let's go for it.
All right, so I'll bring this in. Okay, so let's see. As a customer, I want to customize my own pizza so I can be selective on my pizza toppings. We've got about 56% of people saying it's a 13. So saying it's a little bit more than reviewing an order, but it's a little bit less than modifying the whole list of products. So Luke, how do you feel? So we've got about 50% over on the 13 side. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I think that would be about right. I do want to know, we can't actually see your list there because it's the Zoom.
Oh, you can't? Oh, okay. I apologize.
But hopefully everyone can see it themselves on their own list. So, but I think at 13, it could be right. I could see it being a 20. I think it depends on how much other work we've done ahead of time. So this is where we might put an estimation assumption that the ability to purchase a pizza might be done, because if we haven't even purchased a pizza yet, we probably have like a 40 here, but I think a 13 could be well. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think the 13 is probably pretty good. I'm a little bit worried about whether or not we want some sort of fancy pizza customization. So since this is a user-facing application, there might actually be something someone wants where they're like animates pepperonis coming in over there. And the minute a customer tells me they want animation, then suddenly the estimate starts to go up in my head in terms of the amount of effort and bringing in a design team and that sort of thing. So I'm kind of on that 13-20 cutoff, I would say.
Yeah. So typically what we would do here is so people will talk about it. We would love for all of you to be able to share time to talk about why you just chose yours, but we don't have that much time to have 25 people share their opinions. But teams would typically talk through that, share, and then we would re-vote. So we're actually going to go ahead and do that and have everyone re-vote based on the discussion we have. Do you think it's a 13? Do you think it's a 20 or 40? And then we'll see where we land. So if you want to throw up that next Zoom poll. So again, this is for ordering a pizza to be able to customize your own toppings.
This is the first time I've ever done planning poker over Zoom polls, and it's working exactly as I wanted it to. So I'm really happy with how it's proceeding.
Yeah, I agree.
Thanks to all my guinea pigs out there for participating in leveraging Zoom as an agile development tool. Okay, so we've got coming just about in at the same number of 25 that we had before. And now we're at about 60% of the 13. The eights shrank a little bit, but so did the 20s. So it looks like, Luke, I think everyone's pretty much on board with this being a 13.
Yeah, I think so. So typically it depends on how your team wants to go. Do you want to keep talking about it to see if you can narrow down if there's something else you figured out? Or do you say, hey, we're pretty good right here. That's where the majority have landed. We're going to land there. Also, sometimes if you just can't decide, we recommend maybe bumping up to the higher one, just because that means that you're probably in a more safe place when you get to your forecasting process.
Yep. But for sake of estimation, let's put the 13 here.
I like
it. And move on to the next one. Okay. So as a customer, I want my pizza shipped to my house so I don't have to drive to the restaurant.
Go ahead and throw your estimate out there.
Okay, so we're at about 26 responses. Oh, wow, we got even a lot more engagement. Now we're at about 30. Okay, so I'm seeing 50% of people, so 15 of the 30 votes said this is an 8. 23% for a 13, 17% for a 20, and 10% for a 40. This one was really interesting to me because I think we're actually missing some acceptance criteria. The website doesn't actually ship the pizza to your house. So there is something, there's a part of this story that probably requires a little bit of updates here. So maybe if I change this acceptance criteria to, I can mark an order as delivery, then I imagine that is going to help us understand so that the people who are saying, oh man, this is a 40, this could blow way out of proportion, as compared to the people who may have been making this acceptance criteria an assumption, as opposed to something written down. So maybe that changes our estimation.
Yeah,
what do you think about
that's
this?
A great point, Ben. Typically, when we do these estimations, we would have acceptance criteria for all of these items, at least high-level acceptance criteria. We wouldn't assume that they haven't been done. And also maybe another acceptance criteria point, thank you, Tina, would be that we need their address info for it. So that could be something else to add here. But I think that my thought was an 8 as well, because I'm on the same boat as you. I thought it was market delivery, get your address in there, and that's all the system really needs to do for this.
Cool. Do we queue up a poll for this to have a revote, or do we say we're probably gonna?
Nope, we're just gonna keep moving through.
Okay, so let's keep this as an 8 so we can proceed. And obviously, to our esteemed audience, this is usually not the sort of the steamroll approach that we take to getting through the backlog. We're going to talk through these things, but this is for the sake of argument.
So the last one here is, as admin, I want to manage my restaurant menu so I can keep the menu updated with my latest offerings. So we'll go ahead and launch the last estimate here. While people are putting their votes in, I'll note I did do some adjustments here in the last couple of minutes. I separated our backlog a little bit from our not must-haves to our nice-to-haves. Or what are things that, in order for us to really have a pizza ordering application, we need to have out the door? What are some things that are maybe nice to have, aren't required at first? And this will help us later when we get into the forecasting session. So like I brought out, we don't really need to track the geolocation of pizzas in the first instance. We also probably don't need the allergies or to run reports. We need to be able to order and purchase the pizzas.
It's also really helpful to have your customer in the business of aggressively prioritizing what they need, because something that's really important through the course of the project, not simply at the inception, is to say, well, what is the next most important thing? Because that's the question we must all ask ourselves. If we learned something from Frozen 2, it's what's the next best thing to do? Okay, so it looks like our estimates are settling in. Okay, so we have high estimates on the 8 and high estimates on the 20. And so this is interesting. So as an administrator, I'm guessing, I was thinking this is going to be fairly straightforward. I was just going to say, oh, I have menu and I want to just like write in text for pizzas, and I'm not going to have to put in anything complicated there. I'm just going to say, oh yeah, this is my minimum viable product. So it's just, you know, mom's pizza shop menu, pizza, 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 pizza.
Pizza. Yeah, that, or are we thinking that we actually want to add photos, or we want to add other images, ingredient lists, rather than just names and things? So that's probably, I would probably at least thought of more of a 20 on this sentence. This is one where acceptance criteria, again, is helpful to be able to dictate what is this work that's going to be, and how we move it. And really, I would suggest in this phase, we think about it in the larger aspect. What is that kind of bigger picture? Because we can split that story later on from that nice have and must haves in terms of what we're doing.
Yeah. And Jenna actually asked another really good question in chat. She says, can we assume that the product list has already been done? So for instance, your list of products versus your list, your menu, like, can we assume that this has already been completed in order to power this? So we can make that assumption here. Assume.
Yeah.
Number 6 is done. That's a good one. Okay, so let's drop this in. Luke, I think this is a really good opportunity for us to say, hey, listen, there's probably some debate here, but for us, we tend to round up. So I like this as a good round up opportunity to put this as another 20. How does that feel about to you?
I agree. Typically, because this is so spread from the 8 to 20, we would definitely talk and revote. But for the sake of the webinar, we're going to keep moving.
Awesome. Cool. Well, good job estimating this backlog, everybody. Luke is going to take a look at some of these and rough some in later on for some of our projections. But I think for now, we've done a great job. And you have kind of an idea of how we leverage that planning poker and that discussion process in order to be able to generate these story points. Let's get on to the next bits. Okay, so the next thing we do after we have roughly estimated the point values for our backlog is to estimate our velocity. So our velocity is a function of how quickly our team can move, how many story points we can probably get through on a per sprint basis, and that sprint being, for our case, usually about a 2-week cycle, and with an emphasis on these user stories being shippable. So for Ascendle, one of the things that we focus on is that we don't work on something unless it is a shippable product that we could send out. So that may be a very, very thin feature light slice, but it is done all the way from the user interface all the way to the back end, and it is complete. So it is fully tested, it is fully validated, it is fully understood.
The hard part is we haven't started yet. How do we know what our velocity can be as a team? How do you know where you're moving and going to go? And really, we have 3 ways to suggest to get what that potential velocity is going to be. The first is, and we think is best, run a couple of sprints. Get started with the team that you're going to do, or do the work. And after 3 sprints, you really should be able to find where your groove is in terms of your velocity and then forecast out. Most of the time, stakeholders do not want to just start a project without any type of forecast. So the second best is compared to a prior project. Has this team worked together before? What was their velocity? Is there a historical average for your company as a whole that you can use for those metrics? And the third one is break down some stories. So actually do some work that you might do to fit in what would it look like for us in a sprint to be able to figure out this out. So if we're going to just talk about the third, break down some stories here for a second. The first thing we want to do is how much time do we have in a sprint? What is our capacity that we'll call? So it's team capacity. These are the amount of hours that the team is going to be able to dedicate to the sprint. So this is thinking about all the different roles in your project, whether that's your product owner, your architect, software developers, software engineer, scrum master, compile all that time together. And it's not just, well, they have 8 hours in the day. It's more, how much time is this person dedicated to this project? So if I'm half-time on a project, I should really only have half of my hours in a day going to this capacity. We then take out the meeting times. So the sprint plannings, the daily scrums, the sprint review, all of those things that will come and take away from the amount of time that we can actually spend doing the work, we take out of that. And then we come up with a net capacity, where it's hours per sprint that the team can spend on tasks. Then we have that number that says, okay, our gross capacity is this number. It's maybe 150 hours this sprint. But we also know that people tend to do a poor job of spending 100% of available time on their keyboard. There's emails to do, there's other research that needs to be done at times, or other questions that are happening. So we usually encourage people to shoot for about 80% of their gross capacity as a team for this net capacity number.
And then what we're going to do is we're going to take these stories and we're going to break them up. So now that we know our capacity, we're going to take a story and do what's called microplanning. So the idea here is not, emphasis, not to be able to assign hours to story points. But the idea is to take a story and understand precisely what it's going to take. And now, you remember we were looking previously at stories that were kind of in that 8 to 40 range. And that may be large. So you want to take a story and probably split some of your stories down until they are with something that you could complete, once again, fully complete within the scope of a single sprint. And then go ahead and write down literally every single task that would be involved in that story. So that includes acceptance tests, writing out your views, running your tests, implementing your code and writing unit tests, peer review. There may be infinite, so not infinite, but I can think of off the top of my head, usually 15 to 20 tasks, even for a simple story that you're going to go through, and then assign hours to those. So the idea here is that the smaller you break something down, the closer you are going to be able to get to knowing roughly how these individual tasks will take. And what you're going to do is you're going to add these all up, and that's how long that one story might take.
Let me think about how many can we complete. So we did this for a couple of things. We grabbed a couple. These are some example stories from a shopping cart, and we did this for 4 different stories before we reached whatever the team capacity we're at. So now we add these up and we have, okay, our estimated velocity is 21 points. Again, this is something that we do one time to get the estimated velocity at the beginning of the project. We don't then go through every story in the backlog, split it out, break it out in subtasks, and estimate it so we can continue this process. We really try to do this once just to give that snapshot for what we're going to do until we have the better data that's actually from the team work that we do later on.
Excuse me. Sorry. So now that we have our, oh, sorry. So Michael had a question, and I do want to cover that. So what we were doing, Michael, is we are micro-estimating our, so we're micro-estimating a handful of stories in order to understand, so that is by hour, in order to understand roughly how many of those stories will meet our net capacity. Then once we take that number of stories that meet our net capacity, we then review those story points and add them up. And that is our rough estimated velocity. Once again, that is the least optimal version. Usually the best one is your average running velocity of story points for the last 3 sprints. But that's kind of what we're doing here to get there from here.
It's also why we encourage those subtasking, because it's much easier to estimate what it takes to do something like a very particular type, like write an acceptance test rather than to do a whole card. So that's why that breakdown, because it's easier to estimate 2 hours on write and view acceptance test than it is to estimate 12 hours on a whole story.
Right. So we got some great questions coming in through the webinar chat. I think we're going to probably bring some of the rest of them in during the Q&A. So I want to focus on how we can deliver this directly into the forecast.
Yeah.
Cool. So the idea here is that now that we know roughly what our velocity is, and we know roughly what our backlog looks like, we can start turning that into a rough estimate of time.
So calculating a time frame is there. We're gonna get some math here, so bear with me if you're not a math person. But we do story points over velocity times your sprint length. So we know our total backlog is going to be X amount of story points. We just figured out our team velocity is expected to be 21 points at this time. And then what is that times two? So if we had a backlog of 90 and we were thinking we could do 21 story points in each sprint, times that times 2 weeks, it would get us around 9 weeks or 5 sprints.
No, we didn't. So this is a really good initial snapshot, but can we assume that our velocity will stay the same over the course of time? No, things happen. In fact, Sharon just said, well, what happens when people are constantly getting pulled off your team? Well, your velocity changes. Can we assume that changes have not been added to the project? I will give a nickel to anyone who has done a software project where they haven't made a change, or for that matter, where they haven't had a surprise. I have every time I join someone's Slack, I always add the no surprises emoji, because that's not a thing. You always end up getting surprises, changes, velocity alterations as you go. This is, once again, it's an estimate, it's a forecast, and it's based off of the assumption that things will change.
So that's what we think of the cone of uncertainty. This is something that we talk about is we are going to know the least amount of at this project right now. This team has never worked together for this project, for this purpose before. So we're going to know the least amount now. As we can move forward, we're going to know more and more and be able to get better estimates. So at the very beginning of the project, we recommend you put a range between 0.6 and 1.6 of what your time is that it's going to take for this. So it's this gradual slowing down. So sprint 2, you can reduce that cone of uncertainty to 1.25 to 0.8 and 3 further and further until you're running, hopefully, in a very consistent place. Now, to someone's point, as soon as your team makeup changes, well, this could all go out the window completely, or you can be relative, but you will slow down for a period of time. Even if you're adding new people to your team, you're probably going to slow down for a little bit before you get moving in the right direction again. So then the last here, so what is the range for that cone of uncertainty? It's again, we want to do that velocity times 0.6 to 1.6. So our high duration would be that 90 weeks times divided by 21.6 and times 2 weeks for about 5 weeks. And on the high side, it could get us to 14 weeks. So we had that 9 weeks originally, but now we add this cone of uncertainty, knowing we don't know everything yet. Things are going to change. It gives us a better range to say, we believe this can get done between 5 and 14 weeks. We know that's a hard range. It's a large range, but that's what we can tell you now. As we get farther in, we hopefully can narrow that down. So go ahead, Ben.
Oh, no, go ahead, Luke. Sorry, I apologize.
So this is what the goal would be, that we can create this end graph here that tells us roughly where do we think that we can get in this cone of uncertainty. So we think that based on the direction that we have, the overall process of this project, we can be somewhere between our optimistic of the 13th of January. The predicted is hopefully like the 26th of January, but on the far end, it might be the 10th of February. It really gives that range there. And this is something that doesn't end here. Once we get the velocity moving, once we have the team going, we continue to look at this and adjust it to make sure we can be communicating with the business where things are at, because something might come in that actually pushes us farther off, or something can get taken out that might bring this forward. It's always hard to say.
Yeah, and it's really important to reference those questions that we were talking about at the beginning of the presentation, actually. So, for instance, customer says, I have an idea. I have this whole new feature. And we can say, oh, that's perfect. We already have a fully estimated backlog. And we know our velocity probably by now. We can take your feature, we can estimate that, and we can predict with a fairly reasonable level of certainty of its impact on the rest of the project. Because as you all know, people are zero sum. They can work on this or that. And so this is that thing where we can actually leverage this model in order to be able to provide reasonable, actionable information on the impact of change throughout the course of the project. And that's really the thing that like kind of comes back to for me is that estimation is not you do it at the beginning and you're done. This is a constant ongoing activity that is providing you with a regular understanding of the health of your project and the health of your backlog and the relative impact of change over time. So, Luke, I was wondering, did the information get pushed through into the end
Sure
of
did.
the?
Let's do it.
Okay, cool. All right. So, what Luke ended up doing? Oh, go ahead, Luke. Sorry.
Yeah, so what I ended up doing, I ended up just throwing some estimates out here based on what I was thinking from the rest of the nice to haves, just to move us forward for the conversation. Obviously, we'd never want one person to estimate an isolation. That's never a good result. But for our purposes, that's what we're going to go for. But if you then take this, so you'll see we had 69 points on our must-have and 86 in our nice-to-have. So we've created this projection chart here. It's a way to plug in some information for us to be able to get this cone of uncertainty. And you'll see that we have a grid here that shows, okay, we have some slow ramp up time with the first couple sprints there that we know that we're gonna take some time to get moving. If that's that additional cone of uncertainty. And then when we actually get moving, we have that bottom line, that blue line is that nice to have, or that must have. So somewhere between what we think about the 11th of February and the 11th of March, we will get that done, those nice must-haves. And then if you keep going down the line, somewhere between April 8th and the June 17th, we can have all of that haves done. So we here we created a backlog, estimated a backlog, and thought, how long can it take us to complete this work in a fairly consistent way? I will note that for the velocity metrics of this, because we don't know what the team is going to be, we don't know who they are, we can't break down the stories right now, we used version 2 of what we said for projecting your velocity as a historical range. So we grabbed one of Ascendle's historical teams, thought of what a medium-sized team can be somewhere between 12 and 20 story points in a sprint, and then use that for that. And yes, we will be able to share the spreadsheet later on. We're going to get it all ready so that way it is usable and you can see. Now, we also like to recommend, hopefully you're using this spreadsheet in your initial projections and not through your entire project. There are great tools like Jira and other things available for you, or ADO for that, where they can do a lot of these things, but it's great for the metrics here. So don't manage your backlog out of Excel unless you have to, because it can be a pain over time.
Yeah, for sure. All right. So we have come to the prescribed end of what Luke and I have to say, but I know that there have been a lot of really exciting questions coming back and forth across the wire. So I think that was a good time to head to the Q&A. So Luke, how about I read a question to you and then you answer it and then I answer it? How's that sound?
Sure.
Great. So the first question we have in Q&A is, how do you estimate a project on a support team? I find my developers are getting pulled off for upgrades and production support. This is from Sharon.
I think it would just, when it comes to estimation versus your velocity, so it depends on what your project is going to be, and how important it is to the business. If you really have an initiative that needs to move forward on a support team, you're going to need to make sure you can dedicate time, although we know that other things happen. So that probably comes down to the capacity planning, and probably plan for interruptions in your capacity. So don't plan to what your team's actual hours are available, plan to 50% and just see if that works for a little bit and get what that could be the realistic version, rather than looking to figure out exactly what the time is going to be, because there's so much unknown in a support environment.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I like the idea of this coming in at the capacity point in time. I think the other thing to do, and this is just purely from a time management science perspective, is try to reduce context switching in your teams. So if your team has to be on a support basis, figure out how to say, okay, the first half of the day is support, the second half of the day is development. Or Monday, Wednesday, Friday is development, Tuesday, Thursday is support. Now, obviously, you can't do that if you have some sort of SLA for delivering support answers at a higher level basis. Maybe that's a time to consider whether or not your team should actually be split into having fewer people doing support and a few people doing development, as opposed to this like spread where everyone's wearing a bunch of hats. I always call multitasking failing in parallel.
It's very true. All
Okay.
right, Ben, I'm going to read you a question. I'll let you take this one. So, how do you manage security bugs and technical debt when you're focused on shippable stories?
Oh, that's a great question. I actually really like this one. So part of our approach at Ascendle is we talked about things being done. And from that perspective, when we have a story and it has technical debt, it ain't done. If we have a story and it generated some sort of security problem, also not done. And so from our side of things, we strive to make sure that what we've sliced off from a story perspective is sufficient to avoid the generation of technical debt and security bugs, or other bugs for that matter, by testing and understanding and being very, very careful. Test-driven development, great way to avoid that. Making sure that your entire team is involved in the process. Shift QA to the left as far as you can so that you are immediately engaging with your testing team. One mistake that we have seen very often is to say, okay, development's going to work on something and they're going to do it for 2 weeks and then hand it off to QA for validation. Surefire way to have a whole host of bugs because things cascade together. So those are the things that, some of the things that we use to focus on is that making sure that the entire team owns completion of a story, not just completion of their work.
And I would add to that, I think at sometimes this is easy to think about in a greenfield project when you're doing everything and you're building everything, but we don't always, that's not reality for a lot of us. Oftentimes we're working in legacy projects where there are technical debt and security bugs that need to be accomplished. And I've seen a really good success with teams to be able to say, every sprint, we're going to dedicate 20% of our sprint to doing security bugs and technical debt and things like that. Now, to how that affects estimation is, again, it's back to that capacity. So it's more thinking about, okay, we really only have 60% capacity or 50% capacity for this team to work on new things out of our backlog. So our estimation overall might scan out in terms of what that looks like or what that can spread because of those effects.
Yep, definitely. Okay, so are there any more questions? So Luke, what do you do when the estimation isn't what the stakeholders want to hear or see?
Yeah, this is a really good one. How often have we had it where we tell a stakeholder, hey, this is what it is, and they're like, no, it's not. Like, yeah, it is. And I think it comes down to, if you're interested, I recently wrote a blog about managing stakeholder expectations. It comes down, how do you have transparency and trust and communication within your organization? That way, where we know that we're all trying our best to have something that's realistic. Oftentimes we get pushed to say, well, can we do that in this time instead? And if you've done the work and have a smart group of people that I'm sure you do working on these things, you have to trust yourself that we're probably going to be within this range. Now, there are always the questions you can talk about. Well, we can, if we have more time, more money, more budget, less scope, all of those can shift what that looks like. But those are the conversations to have. It's not necessarily, oh, well, we'll go back and try and move things around. It's really where it is. And it's helping the stakeholders from the beginning to understand, hey, we're happy to have more conversations about this. Also, another way to go about it is, just because this grid says we're going to be done at sprint 12, it doesn't mean that's necessarily when we have to first release. Is there another MVP point where we can really reduce down our must-haves so we can get work out the door earlier for our customers to deliver value to the business? We like to have all of our stories be potentially shippable. So although you might not want to ship just a pizza ordering app that you can order one pepperoni pizza, that is something that could get out the door, that could bring value and revenue to the organization. And then you can begin stacking on top of that. So those are the type of questions to have, and have those honest, transparent conversations with your stakeholders.
Yeah, I love it. And it's the idea of having your stakeholder also really own what their actual priorities are. So this is that opportunity to say, well, you said these things are the most important things. Are they? And if you want to add something, is that actually a more important thing than these other important things? And so very often, this provides us with the ability to objectively discuss what is being requested, as opposed to the idea of hand waving and saying, well, that's what it's going to take. I don't know why. It's just because I capriciously feel like charging you this much money. So this gives us this opportunity to talk about the actual work involved.
Yeah. Great. Next question here, I'll start us off on it again, but how granular should acceptance criteria be when you're trying to estimate a whole bunch of stories? Do you have a rule of thumb for the number of criteria per story? I don't know if I have a necessarily rule of thumb. I'd say if you're above 10 or 15 story like acceptance criteria points, you're probably getting too big, and you might need to think about, can some of these be combined? Can I be more generic here in there, knowing that I'll have to break this into a smaller story later with more detail in there. The key point is that we have that shared vision we talk about like story points. So can, based on the acceptance criteria I have here, the team understand the general concept of what we're going to need to build. We don't need to know all the details, because otherwise we're going to spend way too long estimating, but we need to know generally, hey, if I'm needed to add delivery, really all this is probably going to be is a very simplistic selecting a delivery option and adding address. I don't need to know that I can add zip code and area street, and I have these certain counties that I can deliver to. That's way more detail than we would need in this initial phase. It's really that general portion.
Yep. So let's see, we have time for one more question. We have the next one that came in. Any tips for improving our speed of estimation sessions? The number one thing that helps estimation sessions speed up is practice. If you do 3 estimation sessions in a row over your backlog, boy howdy, you're going to see them. You're going to get through about 2 stories, then about 6 stories, then about 20 stories. I went back to Fibonacci, anything give or take, but you're going to have a rapid speed up of response in terms of how fast you can get through things.
The other thing I would mention is the relative sizing is really important for speed, because you can ask, is this bigger or smaller than this thing we've already agreed on? And that way you're not worrying about the overall details, and I'm not trying to figure out the specifics of something of a particular story. It's more, does my gut feel like this is bigger or smaller than these things? And that can help you really move things quickly.
Yep. And then there was one more question that came in from Sharon that I do want to touch over before we head back into the end of our presentation, specifically about changing your estimations. And the nice part of leveraging a product like Jira or Azure DevOps rather than Excel for planning your process is your estimation can and should update daily. You can always check your estimation and refigure out what's going on based on the current state of things. And that is the actual point, and the secret sauce here is that estimations are a point in time of right now, and you can get them whenever you want, as long as your backlog is properly refined, pointed, and estimated.